She slammed the pelts down on the counter so hard the jars rattled on the shelf. 12 pounds of mountain lion, 8 of beaver, 3 of prime otter, and not one trembling hand. Deputy Kessler reached for her arm. She stepped back without looking at him. Don't. One word. Flat as iron. The whole trading post went silent. William Hawthorne had seen 1,000 traders walk through that door. Ranchers, trappers, men who'd spent decades reading the land. None of them had brought pelts like these. None of them. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel and follow every single part to the end, because what this woman does next will stay with you for a long time. And drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The door of Hawthorne's Mercantile opened without a knock. That was the first thing William noticed. Not the woman herself, not what she carried, but the fact that she did not hesitate at the threshold the way most people did, the half-second pause, the quick look around the room, that small performance of permission-seeking that nearly everyone offered before entering a space that wasn't theirs. She did not do that. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, both hands occupied, and she walked straight to the counter, as though she had mapped the distance in her mind before she ever touched the handle. The bundle she carried was wrapped in oilcloth and bound with 2 lengths of rope. She set it on the counter without asking if she could. The wood groaned under the weight. Then she straightened up, pulled the rope loose with 3 practiced tugs, and folded the oilcloth back with the care of someone who respected what was underneath it. William Hawthorne was standing 6 feet away, tallying a column of figures in his ledger. He did not look up immediately. He had learned over 11 years of running this store that the first man to look up was the first man to concede something attention authority, the quiet advantage of being the one who waited. But when the smell reached him, clean hide rendered fat, something faintly mineral and wild, his pencil stopped moving. He looked up. Beaver pelts. 6 of them stacked with the grain running the same direction, edges trimmed to a clean line. Beside them 2 river otter stretched and dried without a single puncture mark. And at the top of the pile, folded in half, but unmistakable in its spotted tawny weight, mountain lion. William set his pencil down. Behind the woman, Deputy Marshal Henry Kessler leaned against the doorframe with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He had not come in fully. He rarely did these days. He preferred the posture of a man observing rather than participating, as though standing half outside a room gave him jurisdiction over both sides of the wall. She walked in from the Cottonwood Valley Trail, Kessler said, addressing William the way a man addresses another man when a woman is standing right there. Alone, said she had business. The woman did not turn around to acknowledge this. She kept her eyes on William. She was somewhere in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back without ceremony. A canvas coat that had been repaired in 3 places along the left sleeve. Her hands, resting flat on the counter beside the pelts, were marked by the kind of work that leaves permanent traces, calluses along the inner fingers, a thin scar across the right thumb knuckles that had spent real time in cold water and rough weather. She was not beautiful the way the dime novels described Western women. She was something more specific than that. She was competent, and it showed in every line of her posture. Mrs. William began. Whitaker, she said. Eleanor Whitaker. I go by Nora. Mrs. Whitaker. He looked at the pelts again. He couldn't help it. These yours. I trapped them. I tanned them. I carried them here. Her voice was even. Not cold, just factual, the way a person speaks when they've stopped needing to prove things. So, yes, they're mine. William reached out and lifted the corner of the mountain lion pelt. He turned it over and examined the backside, the flesh side where the quality of the work was truly visible. The fat had been removed cleanly. The hide was supple, without being over-softened. The tanning was even, no dark patches where the solution had pooled, no stiff spots where it had dried too fast. He had seen professional tanners out of St. Louis produce work this consistent. He had seen it cost 3 times the going rate. How long have you been working in Cottonwood Valley? He asked. 4 years. Alone. A pause. Not a flinch, just a precise assessment of whether the question deserved an answer. My husband died the first winter, she said. After that alone. Yes. Kessler shifted in this doorway. Mrs. Whitaker, I've said before that the Valley Trail is no safe passage for a deputy. She turned then, just her head, not her body. I walked it this morning. I'm standing here. The trail didn't object. Kessler's jaw tightened. William kept his eyes on the Pelts. He was doing the calculation, not the moral one, not the social one that the rest of Red Hollow would spend the next week performing. The financial one. Pure and simple. 6 prime beaver at current St. Louis rates $42. 2 river otter this quality $18. Mountain lion, if it held up to closer inspection, $22 minimum. $82 for one woman's load. That was more than most of his regular suppliers brought in across an entire month. He looked up at her. I'll need to inspect them fully before I quote you a price. Go ahead, she said. He came around the counter. He worked through each pelt methodically, without performance, without the kind of slow theater some buyers used to make sellers nervous. He checked the stretch, the thickness of the hide, the quality of the fur on the grain side. He looked at the stitching on the bound edges. She'd reinforced them to prevent tearing during transport, a detail that told him she'd done this before and learned from experience. When he reached the mountain lion, he spent more time. This one was the rarest, the most difficult, the one most likely to reveal a flaw in technique. He found none. He stood up and looked at her. Where did you learn to tan like this? My father, she said. He was a hide man in Pennsylvania. I worked beside him from the time I was 8 years old. He teach you to trap too. The land taught me to trap. A beat. He just taught me what to do after. From the doorway, Kessler made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff. Something in between. A woman trapping mountain lion in the Cottonwood Territory. He said to no one in particular. I've been telling the sheriff for 2 months, somebody ought to check on that valley. Nora Whitaker turned fully this time. She faced Kessler with the same unhurried stillness she'd brought to everything else, and when she spoke, her voice did not rise. Deputy Kessler. She folded her hands in front of her. My taxes are paid. My land patent is recorded. My pelts are legal. If you have a charge to make, I'm listening. If you don't, I'd appreciate you letting me conduct my business. The room held its breath. Old Pete Granger, who ran the feed counter at the back and had been pretending to sort nails for the last 10 minutes, stopped pretending entirely. Kessler pushed off the door frame and straightened to his full height. He was a tall man. He used it the way tall men often did. No charge, he said. Just concern. Noted, she said, and turned back to William. There was a long moment where William Hawthorne understood with perfect clarity that he was looking at a situation that went considerably beyond the price of pelts. Red Hollow was not a cruel town. It was not a particularly kind one either. It was a practical town, a town of traders and ranchers and small merchants who made decisions based on whether a thing was useful and who tended to mistake unfamiliar for wrong, without much self-awareness about the confusion. A widow living alone in Cottonwood Valley and trapping mountain lion was unfamiliar, which meant in Red Hollow she was already standing on uncertain ground before she'd said a single word. $85, William said. Nora blinked. It was the only surprise she showed. That's above market rate, she said. The quality's above market standard, he replied. She studied him for a moment. Looking, he understood for the thing underneath the offer. The conditions. The assumed obligation, the implication that a price this high meant something was owed in return. She didn't find it, because it wasn't there. All right, she said. 85. He counted the money out in cash, which was his standard practice for first transactions with new suppliers. It was also, he recognized, a signal cash meant no credit account, no running tab, no financial thread, connecting her to him beyond this single exchange. It meant she left with what was hers, and nothing remaining between them. She took the bills and folded them without counting them in front of him. I'll be back in 6 weeks, she said. Same quantity, likely more, "I'll be here," he said. She nodded. She rewrapped the oilcloth habit, even with nothing left inside it, and tucked it under her arm. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Kessler did not move out of the frame. The space was narrow. Not impassable, but narrow enough to require that she turn sideways or that he step aside. He did not step aside. Nora Whitaker stopped 2 feet from him and waited. It was not a confrontation. It was something quieter than that, and more devastating, the patient stillness of a woman who has outlasted every inconvenience the world has thrown at her, and is fully prepared to wait out one more. Kessler held for 5 seconds. Then he stepped to the left. She walked through without touching the frame. The door closed behind her. Pete Granger exhaled loudly from the back of the store. "Lord above," he said to nobody. "What in the Sam Hill was that?" Kessler turned from the door. His expression was controlled, but the line of his shoulders told another story. "That," he said, "is a problem waiting to happen." William Hawthorne said nothing. He walked back around the counter, picked up his pencil, and wrote, "Whitaker, 85.00 Mountain Lion Beaver Otter." 6 weeks in the margin of his ledger. Then he sat with it for a moment. $85. 6 weeks. More than last time. He had been running this store for 11 years. He had learned to read suppliers the way you read weather, not from single moments, but from patterns. From what a person repeated what they returned to, how they behaved when the price went against them. This woman had looked at a price $3 above what she'd expected, and her first instinct had been to question it rather than take it. That told him something. That told him quite a lot, actually. Outside, he could hear Kessler's boots on the boardwalk, following slowly in the direction Nora Whitaker had walked. William did not look up from the ledger, but he heard it, and he cataloged it, and he filed it in the same place he filed everything that would eventually matter. Tid. 6 weeks passed, the way weeks did in Red Hollow, in inventory and weather, and the slow accumulation of other people's small dramas. Johnson's fence came down in a windstorm, and he blamed Haverford's cattle, which Haverford denied, and it occupied the town for most of the 3rd week. The Beaumont girl got engaged to a boy from Laramie, and half the women in town had opinions about it. The circuit preacher came through and stayed 4 days too long. William worked and watched and said less than he thought. He did not forget the Pelts. He did not forget the woman who'd brought them. On the 43rd day, the door opened the same way it had the first time. No hesitation, no pause at the threshold. And Nora Whitaker walked in with a load that was visibly heavier than the last. She set it on the counter, unwrapped it, stepped back. William came around and looked. Beaver 8 this time, instead of 6. The otter again 3, now all matched in quality. The mountain lion again, and beside it, something he had not expected, 2 wolf pelts. Gray timber wolf. Stretched and dried to a perfection that made his chest tighten slightly, the way beautiful work sometimes did. "The wolves came after my trap lines," she said, reading his expression. "I didn't go after them, but I wasn't going to waste what I had." "No," he said, looking at the pelts. "That would have been criminal." He did the inspection again, same as before, thorough and without theater. She waited without fidgeting, without filling the silence with words. He had noticed that about her the first time, the absence of nervous talk. Most people standing in the quiet of an evaluation they'd invested work into couldn't stop themselves from speaking, offering context, preemptively defending. She just waited. 120, he said. This time she didn't question it. She studied him for a moment, that same careful assessment, and then she nodded. "You have a buyer for the wolf?" she asked while he counted the bills. "I have a buyer in Denver who takes everything I send him above prime beaver grade," William said. "He'll know what those are worth." "Good." She took the money and folded it. "I'll get you 2 more before the season closes." She was turning to go when William said, "Mrs. Whitaker." She stopped. "Are you in town for long?" A pause that carried the weight of a question about the question. "Until I resupply," she said carefully. "Harmon's carries the best quality rope in town. Tell him I sent you, and he'll price it fair." William looked down at his ledger, not at her. "The hardware store 2 doors east, in case you hadn't found it." Another pause, shorter this time. "Thank you," she said, and she left. From the back of the store, Pete Granger, who had for the second time been pretending to sort something, said absolutely nothing. He had the particular wisdom of a man who had learned exactly when to keep his mouth shut. William Hawthorne wrote in his ledger, "Whitaker, 120.00 beaver otter wolf season, close 2 more." He looked at the entry for a long moment. Then he turned the page. Outside, the sound of boots on the boardwalk. 2 sets this time moving in the same direction. He recognized both of them. He turned the page again and went back to work. The 2 wolf pelts sold in 4 days. William had not expected that. His Denver buyer, a man named Aldrich, who ran a furrier operation out of a brick building on Blake Street, and who prided himself on never paying more than he had, sent a telegram back within 48 hours of receiving the shipment. The message was 3 lines. The price he offered was not 3 lines. It was a single number, and that number made William sit down in his chair and read it twice. He wrote the figure in his ledger beside Nora Whitaker's name. Then he sat with what that meant for a long time. The wolf pelts alone had netted him a margin he hadn't seen on a single item since the railroad surveyor had come through 2 years ago and bought every quality saddle blanket in the store for a crew of 40 men. That had been a one-time event, a confluence of luck and timing that William had been sensible enough not to expect again. This was different. This was repeatable. This was a woman in Cottonwood Valley who trapped and tanned with a consistency and a quality that his Denver buyer, a man who had been in the fur business for 30 years and was not given to enthusiasm, had described in his second telegram as exceptional and of a standard rarely encountered outside professional European houses. William read that line several times as well. When Nora walked through the door 6 weeks later on a gray Tuesday morning, with the smell of coming rain in the air, he was ready for her. She set the bundle on the counter. 2 more wolves as promised. 6 beaver. A fox he hadn't anticipated russet and perfectly matched in a pair. She unwrapped them without ceremony and stepped back. He didn't start the inspection immediately. "I have something to tell you," he said. She looked at him with that particular stillness of hers. Not wariness exactly, but precision. The look of a woman who had learned to identify the difference between news that required her to act and news that only required her to listen. "Aldrich in Denver," William said. "He bought the wolves inside 4 days. He's asking if the source you would be willing to enter into a preferred supplier arrangement." Nora said nothing. "That means he'd buy everything you bring at a guaranteed floor price before it goes to open market." William kept his voice level. "It's a good arrangement for most suppliers. Predictable income. Guaranteed buyer." "What does he get?" she asked. "First rights. If you bring pelts to Red Hollow, he sees them before anyone else. If he passes, you sell to the open market." Nora looked at the pelts on the counter. Not at William. At the work she'd brought in, the weeks of trapping, the days of tanning, the physical weight of it all. "And if his floor price drops?" she asked. "The contract sets a minimum. It can't go below." "I read contracts, Mr. Hawthorne." Her voice was not sharp. It was simply precise. "I know what a floor price clause looks like. I'm asking what happens to my leverage if I've already committed to one buyer, and that buyer decides to reinterpret the terms 18 months from now when I'm dependent on the arrangement." William stopped. He had prepared for negotiation. He had prepared for questions about the numbers, about the logistics, about the split. He had not quite prepared for this for a woman who had already thought several moves past the offer itself before he'd finished presenting it. "You've seen this happen," he said. It was not a question. "My husband signed an exclusivity arrangement with a timber buyer the year before he died." She said it flatly, without visible grief, the way a person reports a fact they have already finished grieving. "The buyer changed the payment terms 4 months in. My husband didn't have another buyer lined up. He took what they offered." A pause. "I watched that. I remembered it." The store was quiet. Pete Granger was not at the back today. He'd gone to Laramie for his nephew's christening, which meant William and Nora Whitaker were the only two people in the building, a fact that Kessler would find worth mentioning if he happened to walk by, which he probably would. "I'm not pushing you toward it," William said. "I'm presenting the option because Aldrich asked me to. The decision is yours entirely." She looked at him again. That assessment, careful not suspicious, just thorough. "What would you do?" she asked. The question surprised him. Not because it was strange, but because it was direct in a way that most people weren't. Most people asked, "What do you think I should do?" which put the responsibility at an angle. She was asking him flat out what he would do, which was a different kind of question entirely. "I'd keep my options open," he said. "Sell to Aldrich when his prices are best. Sell to the open market when they're not. Never let one buyer know he's the only one." He paused. "But I also didn't watch what you watched. That changes the calculation." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell Aldrich I appreciate the offer," she said, "and that I'll think about it." "That's a no," William said. "That's a not yet," she said. "There's a difference." She let him inspect the pelts, then the full process, same as every time. He had stopped looking for flaws in her work. Now he inspected, because it was the professional thing to do, and because the ritual of it had become, without either of them naming it, a kind of conversation. His hands moving over the hides told her what he noticed, what he valued, where the craft was visible. Her watching him told him she was paying attention to what he attended to. When he reached the fox pair, he paused longer than usual. "Matched foxes are almost impossible to find in the same season," he said. "I know." She said it without pride, just acknowledgement. "They were littermates. I recognized the marking pattern when I checked the second trap. Took me 3 extra days to get them both." "You waited 3 days for a matched pair?" "The premium is significant." "It is," he agreed. He looked up at her. "You already know what matched fox brings in Denver." "I looked it up," she said. "In the Mercantile Gazette. Your copy. The one you keep behind the counter." A beat. "I hope that was all right." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "When did you—" "The second visit. You were talking to Pete and I was waiting." She met his eyes without apology. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I was trying to understand the market I was operating in." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's mine," he said, finally pointing at the shelf behind him where the Gazette lived. "But you're welcome to read it when you're here." She nodded once. And that was the end of that. He quoted her $145 for the full load, which was the number his own accounting told him was accurate and fair, and she took it without argument, which told him she'd already done the math herself and arrived at approximately the same place. She was pulling on her coat when the door opened. Kessler. He had the particular talent of arriving at moments that would have been better without him. He looked at Nora first. She was the one he always looked at first, which was something William had noticed at their very first meeting, and had continued to track with a quiet, growing attention, and then at William, and then at the empty oilcloth on the counter, and then back at Nora. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "you're in town again." "I am?" she said. "Third time this season." "Business has been good." Kessler stepped fully inside, which was new. He had a habit of staying at the threshold, as though that half position allowed him to claim he was only passing by. Today he came in fully and let the door close behind him. "I've been thinking," he said, addressing Nora with the tone of a man who believed his thinking was a gift to the person receiving it, that Cottonwood Valley isn't a safe situation for a woman alone, particularly through winter. "I survived 4 winters there already," Nora said. "One bad season can undo 4 good ones." "That's true of farming, ranching, and mining too," she said. "Are you suggesting those men also relocate?" Kessler's jaw moved slightly. "That's different." "How?" It was not phrased as a question. It was phrased as an invitation to say out loud the thing he actually meant, and she delivered it, knowing he would not accept the invitation. He didn't. "I'm offering concern," he said. "That's all." I understand that, Nora said. And I'm telling you plainly that I don't need it. She buttoned the top button of her coat. Good day, Deputy. She left. Kessler watched the door for a moment after it closed. Then he turned to William with an expression that was working very hard to appear reasonable. She's going to get herself killed out there, he said. She's been out there for 4 years, William said. She keeps coming back. That's luck. Maybe. William picked up the oilcloth and folded it. Or maybe it's skill. Skill. Kessler said the word as though he were testing whether it would hold weight and had already decided it wouldn't. She's a widow woman living alone in mountain country. Skill doesn't cover everything that can go wrong. William set the folded cloth aside. He looked at Kessler directly the way he looked at a ledger when the numbers weren't adding up with the patience of a man who intends to find the error eventually. What is it you actually want, Henry? He said. He had known Kessler for 8 years. He could use his first name without it meaning friendship. Because it's not her safety you're worried about. A man worried about her safety would be asking whether she has the right equipment, whether the trails are maintained, whether she needs a contact in town for emergencies. You're not asking any of that. Kessler's expression shifted. You're asking about where she lives, and when she comes to town, and what she does with her time. William's voice stayed even. Those are different concerns. A long silence. I'm doing my job, Kessler said. Your job is law enforcement, William said. She hasn't broken any laws. Kessler picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the edge of the counter. He always took it off inside. It was one of his few consistent courtesies, and put it back on with the slow deliberateness of a man making sure his exit had dignity. You're friendly with her, he said. It was meant to be an observation. It landed as something else. She's a supplier, William said. Same as Johnson, same as the Haverford boys, same as Dolores Marsh, who brings me her honey preserves every September. I'm friendly with all of them. Kessler looked at him for a moment, and then he nodded once and left. William stood in the quiet store and thought about what had just been said and what hadn't been said, and then he went back to his ledger and wrote a number in the margin and stared at it until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like a direction. He was not a man who made decisions quickly. He was not a man who acted on instinct or feeling before he'd turned a thing over completely in his mind and examined it from every angle. 11 years of running a business on the frontier had made him that way, not cautious in the paralyzed sense, but deliberate in the sense that when he moved he knew exactly where his foot was going to land. What he was beginning to understand in the days after Nora Whitaker's third visit was that something was shifting in the architecture of his daily calculations, and that the shift had been building gradually enough that he had not noticed the angle of it until now. He thought about the matched fox pelts for an unusually long time. The next 6 weeks moved at their own pace, which is to say, they moved both slowly and quickly in the way that time does when a person is aware of a date approaching. William completed inventory-managed 2 supplier disputes, weathered a 3-day stretch of bad weather that kept customers away, and played chess on Thursday evenings with Doc Harker, who was the only other person in Red Hollow who took the game seriously. He did not talk about Nora Whitaker. He thought about her professional situation with some regularity, about the Aldrich offer, which she had declined without being impolite, about the market for matched fur pairs, which was strengthening in the East, about the wolf pelts, which Aldrich had already begun inquiring after a second shipment of, about the practical reality that Red Hollow sat between Cottonwood Valley and every significant buyer in the region, which meant that as long as Nora Whitaker wanted access to those buyers, their paths would continue to intersect. He told himself these were the things he was thinking about. He was a deliberately honest man. He knew on some level that this accounting was incomplete. When she walked through the door on the 41st day 5 days early, which was the first departure from her established pattern, he was behind the counter and he registered the date before he registered her expression. Her expression told him something was wrong. She didn't storm in. She didn't look frightened. She looked the way a person looks when they have been holding something tightly for several hours and have decided with great deliberateness to set it down carefully instead of throwing it. She placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. "Someone left this on my door," she said. William unfolded it. The handwriting was blocky, deliberately disguised, the kind of anonymous script a person produces when they want to say something they don't want attributed to them. The message was 7 words. "Women alone in this territory invite trouble." He read it twice. Then he set it on the counter with the same care she'd used placing it there. "When?" he asked. "I found it 3 days ago. I finished my round first before coming in." She said it without apology. Her trapline was her livelihood. A threatening note did not change that arithmetic. "I wanted to see if anything else happened." It didn't. "You think you know who wrote it?" "I have a clear idea," she said. "But I don't have proof, and I'm not interested in making accusations without proof." William looked at the note again. He thought about Kessler standing in his store 2 weeks ago saying, "What is it you actually want, Henry?" and getting back an answer that wasn't an answer. "I can speak to the sheriff," he said. "And say what?" Her voice was not dismissive, it was precise. "That someone left a note. The sheriff will call it a prank. Tell me not to worry." She looked at William steadily. "I'm not here because I'm frightened, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm here because I'm informing you. Because if something does happen, I want someone in town to have context." The thing she was doing, he understood, was building a record. The way a careful person builds a record, not dramatically, not with expectation of rescue, but systematically, the way you document a business concern before it becomes a legal one. "All right," he said. "I have context." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small ledger, not his main accounts book, a separate one he used for notes and correspondence. He wrote the date a brief description of what she'd told him and her name at the top of the entry. He turned the ledger so she could see it. She read what he'd written. She nodded. "Thank you," she said. "Would you like to sit down?" He said it before he'd fully decided to say it, which was unusual for him. "I can have Pete bring coffee from the back." A pause. Then, "All right." Pete, who had been at the back and absolutely not listening, appeared with 2 cups in under 2 minutes, which was the fastest he had moved in recent memory. They sat William behind the counter on his stool, Nora on the single chair he kept near the window for customers who needed to wait, and they drank coffee in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which itself was something worth noting. "How did you end up in Red Hollow?" she asked eventually. "You don't sound like you're from here." "I'm not. East Coast, Massachusetts originally." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "I came west after the war. I'd been working in a counting house in Boston for 4 years, and I needed something that was mine." He paused. "I bought this store from a man named Farley who wanted to retire to California. I was 23, and I didn't know what I was doing." "But you learned." "I learned?" he said. "What about family?" she asked. And then very precisely, "You don't have to answer that." "No wife," he said. "No. There was a woman in Boston I thought that might have gone somewhere. It didn't." He said it the same way she'd talked about her husband's timber contract as fact, that had already been processed, filed, made peace with. She wanted a man who would stay in Massachusetts. I didn't end up being that man. Nora looked into her cup. "Thomas, my husband, he was a good man," she said. "He wasn't strong in the way the West asks you to be, but he was kind. He built the cabin with his own hands." She was quiet for a moment. "The first winter took him in 6 weeks. Fever. There was nothing I could do." Another pause. "I almost went back east. I almost packed everything." "What stopped you?" She looked at him. "The cabin was paid for," she said. "The land was mine. And I'd watched my mother spend her whole life dependent on the decisions of other people, and I swore when I married Thomas that whatever happened, I would always have something that was mine." The store was quiet. Outside, Red Hollow moved through its afternoon at its usual pace. A wagon went by. A dog barked once and stopped. "Your father's tanning technique," William said after a while. "The process you use, there's something in the flesh, side finish I've never seen from anyone else. It's a different preparation, isn't it? Before the tanning solution goes on." Her expression changed, not dramatically, but distinctly. The way a person's face changes when they're asked about something they love. He used a cold water ash rinse, she said. Most tanners go straight to the solution after fleshing. He added a rinse step, opened the pores differently, which gives you the evenness in the final hide. Exactly. She leaned forward slightly. Most people can't see that. They just see the end result. I've been handling hides for 11 years, William said. I noticed the process. She looked at him with that particular expression she had, the one that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one inhabiting the same emotional territory without committing to the arrival. You do, she said. It was in its way the most significant thing she had said to him. Not because of the words themselves, but because of what they acknowledged, that she had been watching him work, the same way he had been watching her. That they had both been paying attention. That this had been mutual. The afternoon moved on. She left before dark with a restocked set of supplies from Harmon's Hardware that she'd arranged while William finished a late customer transaction. She did not say goodbye in a way that suggested anything other than the practical close of a practical day. But at the door, she stopped. The note, she said without turning around. I'm not going to let it change anything. I know, William said. She nodded and left. William stood in the empty store for a moment after she was gone. Then he picked up the threatening note from the counter, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the separate ledger beside his written record of what she'd told him. He had been a merchant long enough to know the difference between a transaction and an investment. He was beginning to understand with the slow certainty of a man who does not move until he is sure that what was happening between himself and Nora Whitaker had stopped being a transaction some time ago. He just hadn't named it yet. Outside, the first few drops of coming rain hit the boardwalk. Somewhere down the street, in the direction of the sheriff's office, Henry Kessler was watching the road that led out of Red Hollow toward Cottonwood Valley. And in the separate ledger that William Hawthorne kept for things that mattered, there were now 2 entries beside Eleanor Whitaker's name, a number and a date, and a truth that was still gathering its full weight before it announced itself. The rain that had started as a few drops the evening Nora left became 3 days of steady weather that kept most of Red Hollow indoors and made the roads into Cottonwood Valley impassable for anything heavier than a single horse. William used the time to catch up on correspondence. He wrote to Aldrich in Denver a careful letter professionally worded explaining that his Cottonwood Valley supplier had considered the exclusivity arrangement and declined at this time, but that the supply relationship would continue on open market terms and that Aldrich should expect another wolf shipment within the month. He wrote it twice, the second version shorter than the first, cutting every sentence that explained more than it needed to. He did not mention Nora Whitaker by name in the letter. He referred to her as my supplier. That was the professional convention, and he used it, and he told himself the choice was entirely conventional. Aldrich's reply came back in 9 days. It was not the response William had expected. He read it standing at the counter, which was where the mail arrived, and he read it twice before he set it down. Then he walked to the back of the store, poured himself a cup of coffee that Pete had made 2 hours ago, and that was now nearly cold, and drank half of it without tasting it. Aldrich was not simply asking for a continued supply arrangement. Aldrich was proposing a formal partnership, a 2-year contract, that would designate Williams Mercantile as the exclusive regional buyer for all premium fur coming out of the Cottonwood Valley territory. The contract would give Aldrich first right of purchase on every pelt that passed through Williams' hands, with a guaranteed volume commitment and a pricing structure that locked in margins on both ends. The numbers were good, genuinely good. The kind of good that a merchant running a frontier store 11 years into his career did not see frequently. The problem was what the contract required. Because Aldrich's proposal assumed, took for granted, built its entire financial architecture upon the continued cooperation of a woman who had already looked William in the eye and told him plainly and without ambiguity that she would not enter an arrangement that compromised her freedom. William set the letter in his separate ledger and spent the next 4 days thinking. He did not tell Pete. He did not mention it to Doc Harker during Thursday chess. He turned it over in his mind, the way he turned over complex inventory problems from every angle in every light testing. whether what looked like an opportunity from one direction looked like something else from another. What he kept coming back to was not the money. The money was real, and the money mattered. He was a businessman, not a saint, and he had a store to run and a future to fund. But the money was not what kept him awake. What kept him awake was the question of what he owed her. Not legally, not contractually. What he owed her in the currency of the kind of person he intended to be. She had trusted him with the note. She had sat in his store and drunk his coffee and talked about her father's ash rinse technique and about watching her mother live at the mercy of other people's decisions. She had told him what she valued most. Clearly her land, her independence, the right to make her own choices without being cornered into them by circumstances arranged by someone else. And here was Aldrich offering him a contract that would only work if Nora Whitaker had no other options. On the 5th day, he wrote back to Aldrich. He accepted the volume commitment and the pricing structure. He accepted the first right of purchase clause with one modification: the contract would apply only to pelts sold directly by William Hawthorne from his own inventory and would not bind any third-party supplier or restrict their right to sell independently. He added a clause not standard. He wrote it himself, and he knew Aldrich would push back on it that required 30 days written notice before any pricing adjustment could take effect. He sent the letter and waited. He did not tell Nora about any of it, not yet, because when he told her he wanted to be able to put the full contract in front of her and show her exactly what had been arranged and what had not been arranged, and let her read every line of it with her own eyes. She had said she read contracts. He believed her entirely. And he believed that what she would find in this one would tell her something about him that he did not know how to say in conversation, without it sounding like a speech. Aldrich came back in 11 days. He had agreed to the notice clause. He had not agreed to the supplier independence addendum, and had crossed it out with a single line of firm objection. He'd written in the margin, "This defeats the purpose of the arrangement." William read that margin note and put the letter down and sat for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote 3 words back to Aldrich. "That's the condition." He did not hear from Denver for 2 weeks after that. In the meantime, Nora came back. She arrived on a Wednesday, which was not her usual pattern. She tended toward Tuesdays, which she'd explained once was because Tuesday was when Harmon's Hardware took new stock deliveries, and she could assess what was fresh before it had been picked over. Wednesday meant something had shifted. She walked in with a smaller bundle than usual and set it on the counter with less certainty in the motion than he was accustomed to seeing from her. He waited. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "All right," he said. She did not unwrap the pelts first. She stood with both hands on the counter and looked at a spot somewhere between herself and him, the way people look when they are organizing words they've been rehearsing. "I've been approached by someone," she said. "A man named Croft. He came to Cottonwood Valley last week. He said he represents a land acquisition company out of Kansas City." William went still. "He wants to buy my land," she said. "Or rather, he says he wants to buy it." She looked up. The way he explained it, the railroad is planning a spur line through the valley, southern route. The survey puts it within half a mile of my property. "How close to the cabin?" "Close enough that he offered me 4 times what I paid for the land patent." She said it flatly. He was very pleasant about it. He had papers. He had a company seal. He said it was a generous offer and that I should consider it quickly because these arrangements close fast. William understood what she was not saying. She was describing the exact scenario she'd described before sitting in the chair by his window. The timber buyer. The contract that changed the husband who had no other options. She was describing it happening again, aimed at her this time, and she was watching herself from the outside with the clearest eyes he had ever seen on a person. "Did you sign anything?" he said. "No." The word was immediate. "I told him I needed to consult my business associates and I would be in touch." "Business associates," William repeated. I needed a reason to not sign on the spot without insulting him. She met William's eyes. "You're the only person in Red Hollow I trust with financial matters, so I came to you." The weight of that sentence settled into the room like something physical. She trusted him. She had said it plainly, which was not a thing she did carelessly. He had known her long enough to understand that every direct statement she made had been decided on before it left her mouth. She did not say things she didn't mean, and she did not say things she hadn't already considered. "Do you have the papers he gave you?" William asked. She reached into her coat and produced a folded document. She set it on the counter. He opened it and read it. Slowly, the way he read any contract, looking not for what it said, but for what it assumed. The language that appeared reasonable on the surface, and revealed its real purpose in the subordinate clauses. He found what he was looking for on page 2. "This isn't a purchase offer," he said. "I know," she said. "It's an option agreement. He's not buying your land. He's buying the right to buy it within 12 months at a price he sets at the time of exercise." He turned the page so she could see the clause. "That number he quoted you, the 4 times market value. That's the option price, not the sale price. By the time he exercises the option, the contract gives him room to adjust for, and I'm quoting changes in survey determination or market conditions." Nora looked at the clause. She read it twice. "So the number he told me means nothing," she said. "The number he told you is real enough to make you sign the option. After that, the real negotiation starts." William set the document on the counter. "And once you've signed the option, you can't sell to anyone else. You're locked in." The store was quiet. "He's coming back in 4 days for my answer," she said. "Tell him no," William said. "I already know that." Her voice was not impatient, just direct. "What I need to know is whether there's something I'm missing. Whether the railroad survey is real. Whether this company is real. Because if the railroad is genuinely coming through the valley, that changes things, not whether I sell, but what my land is actually worth, and who else might be bidding." She was right. She had already thought past the immediate threat, and was working the larger problem. William felt something that was not quite admiration, and not quite surprise. It was something in between the feeling of recognizing a quality you had suspected, and are now watching confirmed. "I can send a telegram to the county land office in Laramie," he said. "Ask about survey filings for railroad rights-of-way in Cottonwood Valley. That's public record. They have to file before they can proceed." "How long?" 3 days if I send today." "Send it today," she said. He did. He wrote it out, paid the telegraph fee himself. She tried to hand him money, and he shook his head without making a production of it, and sent it before she'd finished looking through his copy of the Mercantile Gazette for current land valuations in railroad corridor territories. When he came back, she had the Gazette open on the counter and was making small pencil marks in the margin of a column about Kansas City land acquisition companies. She looked up. "Did you know there are 4 active acquisition companies operating out of Kansas City right now? All of them connected to the same 3 investors." He hadn't known. He came around the counter and looked at where she was pointing. "Croft's company isn't listed here," she said. "That could mean it's new," William said, "or it could mean it doesn't exist the way he described it." She tapped the margin. "If you're a legitimate company buying railroad corridor land, you want your name in print. You want sellers to know you're real and funded. The fact that Croft's company isn't mentioned anywhere I can find means either they're very new or they're very small." She looked up. "Or they're not what he said." William looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking someone wants my land," she said. "And I'm thinking the railroad might be real because that kind of lie is too easy to disprove. But the company buying the land might not be the end buyer. They might be a middle layer." She paused. "Someone is speculating on corridor land before the survey becomes public. If they can option as much land as possible before the announcement and then resell to the railroad at a premium, they make the difference between the option price and the railroad price," William said. "And I make nothing," she finished. He stood there for a moment just looking at her. The way she had taken a threatening situation and turned it into a business analysis, working the angles with the same methodical attention she brought to every trapline. The way she had not panicked, had not signed, had come here with the document in her hand, and the right questions already formed. "Nora," he said. And it was the first time he had used her first name without the Mrs. Whitaker in front of it, and they both noticed, and neither of them addressed it. "If the land office confirms the survey, your property value is real. You don't have to sell to Croft. You don't have to sell to anyone. You can wait for the railroad to make a direct offer, which they're required to do under eminent domain procedures before they can file condemnation." "I know about eminent domain," she said. "I know you know," he said. She looked at him then with an expression that was something new, something he hadn't seen from her before in all the months of transactions and coffee and the note in the separate ledger. It was not the assessment she usually gave him. It was softer than that, and more careful, the look of a person who is reevaluating the ground they're standing on and finding it more solid than they'd allowed themselves to expect. "You're not going to suggest I sell," she said. "No. Most men would. Most men would tell me to take the money while it's offered and be sensible." "Most men," William said, "would be giving you advice that was convenient for them. Taking the money makes you leave Cottonwood Valley and makes your situation simpler for everyone who finds your situation inconvenient." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not one of those men." The silence that followed was different from their other silences. It had weight to it, and warmth, and the specific texture of a moment where two people are simultaneously understanding something and choosing not to name it out loud just yet. Kessler walked through the door. The timing was so perfectly bad that Pete, who had come in from the back to get a bolt of fabric for a customer, actually stopped in his tracks and looked at the ceiling. Kessler took in the scene: Nora standing at the counter. The open Gazette, the document William had moved to the side, the particular quality of the air in the room, and William watched him process it with the focused attention of a man who notices things he doesn't know how to do anything useful with. "Mrs. Whitaker," Kessler said. Again. "Deputy," she said. He walked to the counter. His eyes went to the document. William moved his hand and set it flat in a way that was not aggressive, but was definitive, a clear signal of where the document's relevance began and ended, and it was not with Kessler. "There's a man named Croft in town," Kessler said, still looking at Nora. "Came in yesterday from the Laramie Road. Says he's in real estate." "I'm aware of him," Nora said. "He mentioned he'd been out to Cottonwood Valley to see you." Kessler's voice was even, but the edge underneath it was not. "I thought that was worth checking on." "Everything is fine," she said. "Thank you." "He's a legitimate businessman," Kessler said. "His papers are in order. I looked." Something moved across Nora's expression, fast contained, but there. "You looked," she repeated. "It's my job to know who's conducting business in this territory. And did your looking extend to the company he represents?" She kept her voice level. "Or just his personal papers?" Kessler shifted. "His personal papers were sufficient," he said. "I see." She folded the document and put it back in her coat. "Then I appreciate your thoroughness, Deputy." She buttoned her coat. "Mr. Hawthorne, I'll come back Thursday for the telegram response." "Thursday," he confirmed. She left. Clean and straight, the same way she always left without looking at Kessler on her way out. Kessler waited until the door was fully closed. "She doesn't trust Croft," he said. "No," William said. "Croft's offer is fair. I saw the numbers." William looked at Kessler with the patience of a man who has been watching another man's motivations for several months and has arrived at a very clear picture. "Croft showed you the numbers," he said. A beat. "He mentioned what he'd offered her when I asked about his business." Kessler's jaw was working slightly. "It's a fair price for that land. She'd be wise to take it." "That's her decision to make," William said. "Not yours, not Croft's. She's being stubborn. She's being careful." William came around the counter and began moving the Gazette back to its shelf, keeping his hands busy, because if he kept his hands busy, he was less likely to say something he could not unsay. Those are not the same thing, and a man who can't tell the difference between them has no business giving a woman financial advice. Kessler's face went through several things at once. "You're awfully protective of a woman you've known for 6 months," he said. "I'm protective of anyone who comes into my store with legitimate business and gets interfered with," William said. "The fact that she's a woman doesn't change that. The fact that you think it should is the entire problem." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence after Kessler's other visits. There was something final in it. Something that meant a line had been said out loud that had previously only existed between them as an unspoken understanding. Kessler picked up his hat. "Croft is leaving Friday," he said. "She has until then." "Then she has until then," William said. "That's her business." Kessler left. Pete appeared from the back with the bolt of fabric he'd been pretending to look for. He set it on the side counter, looked at William, and then looked at the door. "You know," Pete said, "I've worked here 6 years, and I ain't never seen you talk to Kessler like that." "There's a first time," William said. "She know you did that. She was already gone." Pete nodded slowly, the way old men nod when they are deciding whether to say the thing they are thinking. He decided to say it. "That's a particular kind of man," Pete said. "Who does the right thing when nobody's watching to give him credit for it?" William did not respond to that. He went back behind the counter and picked up the ledger, the separate one, and opened it to the page with Nora's entries. 3 days later, the telegram from Laramie arrived. The railroad survey was real. A right-of-way filing had been registered with the county land office 7 weeks ago. The survey line ran through the eastern edge of Cottonwood Valley, and the company that had filed the survey rights was not the company Croft represented. It was a Chicago firm William had never heard of, 3 corporate layers removed from anything Croft had shown Kessler. Croft was a speculator, a middleman buying options on corridor land before the real buyer came in and paid the premium. William read the telegram. He sat down. He read it again. Then he folded it into the separate ledger and waited for Thursday. When Nora came through the door Thursday morning, he was already standing at the counter with the telegram open in front of him. She looked at his face before she looked at the paper. "Tell me," she said. He told her everything. Croft, the Chicago firm, the 7-week filing, the 3 corporate layers. He laid it out in order the way he laid out any business problem, clearly, completely, without editorializing before she had all the facts. She listened without interrupting. She stood very still. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The land is worth more than Croft offered," she said. "Significantly," William said. "If the Chicago firm is the actual railroad proxy and the survey holds, you're looking at eminent domain proceedings, which means the valuation is set by the court, not by a speculator with option papers. And Croft knows this." "Croft knows this," William confirmed. "His offer was designed to get your signature before you found out." Nora put both hands flat on the counter. She looked at the telegram. She breathed in once slowly through her nose. "He was at my door," she said, quietly. "He sat across my table and told me this was a generous offer and that I should be grateful." Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was something hot and old, not just about Croft, about every person who had ever looked at her situation and seen an easy target. And he knew, the whole time. "Yes," William said. She looked up. "What do I do now?" she asked. And immediately before he could answer, "I know what I do. I'm asking because I want to hear someone else say it." "You do nothing until Croft's deadline passes," William said. "You do not answer him. You do not decline. You simply don't respond. Then you write to the county land office directly and request a copy of the survey filing. You keep that document, and then you wait for the Chicago firm to contact you directly because they will have to. And when they do, you have a lawyer read the correspondence before you respond to a single word of it." He met her eyes. "I can write to a land attorney in Cheyenne I've worked with before. Good man. He doesn't charge for an initial review." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You've been working on this since I left Monday," she said. I sent the telegram Monday afternoon, he said. I didn't know what it would say. But you were ready for what it did say. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. She was quiet. Then, William. It was the first time she had used his first name. Just that William with the precise weight of someone who has made a decision about something and is expressing it through a word. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Not the brief functional thank you she gave when he told her about hardware stores or quoted accurate prices. Something fuller than that. Something that meant more than the transaction they were sitting inside of. He nodded. Outside, down the street, Croft was in the hotel dining room eating his last breakfast before Friday's departure, confident in the timeline he had set, and unaware that the timeline had already collapsed. And in William Hawthorne's separate ledger beside Eleanor Whitaker's name, there was now a telegram, a land filing number, and an entry that read, Thursday. She knows. She'll hold. And below that in handwriting, slightly different from his usual, slightly less measured, slightly more human, 3 additional words he had not quite planned to write. She always will. Croft left Red Hollow on Friday morning without an answer. William watched him go from behind the counter, not from the window, not obviously, but he heard the hotel wagon pass on the street at 7:42, and he knew what that sound meant. He had made it his business to know Croft's schedule the same way he made it his business to know everything that moved through this town with commercial intent. Pete came in at 8 and set his coat on the hook by the door and said, Croft's gone. The way a man reports weather factual unremarkable already accounted for. I know, William said. She didn't sign. No, Pete nodded. He went to the back to start the morning inventory without saying anything else. That was one of the things William valued most about Pete Granger. The man had an unerring instinct for when a silence was already saying everything that needed to be said. What William did not know, and would not know for 3 more days, was what Croft had done before he left. He found out on Monday when Sheriff Dale Atkins walked through the door at 10 in the morning with his hat in his hand, and the particular expression of a man carrying news he would rather have delivered by someone else. Atkins was a fair man. William had always thought that about him, not a brilliant man. Not a complicated one, but fair in the straightforward way that frontier towns needed their law enforcement to be fair, which meant he applied the rules consistently and did not generally let personal preference override his reading of a situation. He set a folded document on the counter. Henry brought this in this morning, he said. Came from Croft before he left. I need to ask you about it. William unfolded it. It was a sworn statement. Croft's signature at the bottom, notarized with a county seal from Laramie, which meant he had prepared it in advance, which meant it had been his backup plan from the beginning. The statement alleged that William Hawthorne had interfered in a legitimate land acquisition negotiation by providing a third party unnamed, but the description was unmistakable, with fraudulent information about survey filings, with the intent to devalue the acquisition offer and preserve a personal business arrangement. William read it twice. Then he set it on the counter with the same flatness he'd used setting down the threatening note 3 weeks ago. He's saying I fabricated the telegram, William said. That's what the statement says. Atkins confirmed. Henry thinks there may be grounds to... The telegram came from the Laramie Land Office, William said. I have the original. I have the telegraph operator's receipt with the sender information. The filing number is public record. Any clerk can verify it in 20 minutes. He looked at Atkins directly. This is a retaliation document, Dale. Croft didn't get the signature he came for, so he left a legal problem behind him to cause difficulty. Atkins rubbed the back of his neck. I know that's likely the case, but Henry filed it, so I have to... Kessler filed it, William said. Not a question. Atkins' expression confirmed it without his mouth having to. William felt something move through him that was not quite anger. It was colder than anger, more deliberate, the feeling of a pattern completing itself into a shape he could now see fully for the first time. Kessler had known Croft. Kessler had seen the offer numbers. Kessler had told Nora she'd be wise to sell. And now, Kessler had taken Croft's parting document and turned it into an official filing. "I'll have the telegraph receipt on your desk within the hour," William said. "And I'll write to the Laramie Land Office directly requesting a certified copy of the survey filing. That takes 3 days. Will that be sufficient?" "That'll be sufficient," Atkins said. He picked up his hat. "I'm sorry about this, Will. I want you to know I don't think—" "I know what you think, Dale," William said. "I appreciate it. Get me 3 days." Atkins left. William stood at the counter for exactly 90 seconds. Then he went to the back, told Pete he was stepping out, put on his coat, and walked 4 blocks to the telegraph office. He sent 2 telegrams. One to the Laramie Land Office requesting the certified copy. One to the land attorney in Cheyenne, the same man he'd mentioned to Nora, with a brief summary of the Croft situation and a request for a rapid assessment of the legal exposure. He paid for both, collected his receipts, and walked back. He did not go to Cottonwood Valley. Not yet. He needed the certified documents in hand before he told Nora what had happened, because arriving with news and no solution was not something he was willing to do. He would arrive with both, or he would wait until he had both. He waited. The Cheyenne attorney, a man named James Beaumont, who had the dry precision of a man who had spent 30 years reading the fine print of other people's optimism, sent a reply in 2 days. The reply was 4 paragraphs. The first 3 were legal analysis, clear and unencouraging about Croft's ability to make the statement stick, but clear and equally unencouraging about the time and expense required to definitively quash it. The 4th paragraph was something else. The more significant concern, Beaumont wrote, is not the statement itself, but the pattern it represents. A document of this nature filed against a merchant of standing in a frontier territory, combined with an active law enforcement officer willing to formalize it, creates a legal and social environment designed to isolate the original acquisition target. If the goal is to pressure the landowner into a sale, removing her most effective local advocate is the logical preceding step. I would suggest the immediate priority is not defending Mr. Hawthorne's reputation, which the documents will do adequately, but ensuring the landowner has independent legal counsel before any further contact from acquisition parties. William read that paragraph 4 times. Then he put on his coat, told Pete he would be gone until morning, saddled his horse, and rode to Cottonwood Valley. It was the first time he had made the trip. He had thought about it. He was honest enough to admit that in the context of understanding the terrain she worked in, the distances, she covered the physical reality of a life that produced those pelts and required her to carry them out alone. He had built a picture of it in his mind from everything she'd told him. The picture was accurate in its details and completely insufficient in its scale. The valley was bigger than he'd understood, and the trail was harder. And by the time he reached the cabin, it was late afternoon, and he had a new respect for the weight she walked into town with every 6 weeks. He knocked on the door. There was a pause, the specific pause of a person inside a dwelling who has heard something unexpected and is assessing it before responding, which was not a small thing in territory where unexpected sounds could mean real trouble. Then, "Who's there?" "William Hawthorne," he said. A longer pause, then the door opened. She was in her work clothes. The canvas coat, a heavy shirt underneath her hair, not pulled back with its usual tidiness, but loose around her face, which was the face of a woman who had been working and had not expected company. She looked at him with an expression that moved through several things in rapid sequence: surprise, assessment, and then a particular kind of attention that told him she had already registered that he would not have come here unless something had happened. "Come in," she said. The cabin was small and completely organized, which told him everything he needed to know about how she lived, not Spartan exactly, but precise. Every object in a location that made sense. Nothing wasted, and nothing decorative. He noticed a set of tanning tools on the work table, a half-finished hide on the stretching frame, 2 lanterns lit against the evening. He noticed all of it, and sat down in the chair she pointed to without making observations about any of it. He told her everything. He told it in order the way he had told the Croft information, clearly, completely, without editorializing until she had all the facts. Croft's statement. Kessler's filing. Beaumont's letter. The 4th paragraph. She listened without interrupting. She was sitting across from him with her hands around a cup of coffee she'd put in front of him, and one she held herself, and she listened with the stillness he had come to understand was not passivity, but the opposite of it. It was total attention, every part of her focused on what he was saying. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Kessler filed it," she said finally. "Yes." He helped Croft before Croft left. That's what the timeline suggests. She set her cup down. She stood up and walked to the window. Not to look out of it, he understood, but to move because she was someone who thought better when her body was engaged with something. "How much trouble are you in?" she asked. Her back was still to him. "Manageable trouble," he said. "The documents will clear it. Beaumont's confident." She turned around. "That's not what I asked," she said. "I asked how much trouble you're in, not how clearable it is." He looked at her. "It's real trouble," he said. "The filing creates a record. Even when it's dismissed, the record exists. In a town this size, a legal filing against a merchant creates questions. Questions affect trust. Trust affects business." He paused. "It'll cost me something. I don't know exactly how much yet." She looked at him with an expression that was very carefully controlled, and underneath the control was something he hadn't seen from her before, a fierceness that was not about anger, but about something more personal than anger. Something that looked like it hurt. "You rode here to tell me in person," she said. "Beaumont thinks you need independent counsel before any more acquisition contact. I wanted to tell you that directly." "You could have sent a message through Pete." "I could have," he agreed. She stood very still. "William," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it straight." "All right." "Did you know when you changed Aldrich's contract, when you added those clauses protecting my right to sell independently? Did you know that would create this kind of problem, that keeping my options open would make you a target?" He thought about the question. He gave it the same honesty he gave his ledger. "I knew Kessler was involved with Croft in some capacity," he said. "I didn't know the specific shape the retaliation would take, but I knew that protecting your position would cost me something with certain people in this town." He held her gaze. "I thought it was worth it." Silence. "Why?" she asked, quietly. Not accusing asking, actually asking with the full weight of someone who needed to understand the real answer. "Because you're the best supplier I've ever had," he said, "and because you're the most capable person I've dealt with in 11 years of this business. And because watching Kessler and Croft arrange your world into a corner made me so angry, I couldn't see clearly, and the only thing I knew how to do with that was make sure they couldn't complete the arrangement." He stopped. Then more quietly, "And because you trusted me with the note. And no one puts that kind of trust in me lightly. I'm not in the habit of wasting it." The cabin was very quiet. Outside, the valley was moving into its evening sounds, the specific sounds of a wild place settling toward night that she would know by heart, and he was hearing for the first time. She sat back down across from him. She picked up her cup. She held it with both hands, the way she often did, and she looked at him over the rim with that expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same country. "I'm not selling," she said. "I know. And I'm not leaving. I know that too. And I'm going to write to Beaumont myself," she said. "I'll pay for the consultation. He's working on my situation ultimately. I'm not putting that on you." He started to object. She held up one hand just slightly, and the gesture was so unambiguous that he stopped. "I'm not arguing about it," she said. "That's how it's going to be." He nodded. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said something that he had not expected, and that landed in him somewhere deep and irreversible. "Stay for supper," she said. "It's late to ride back." He looked at her. "I have salt pork and cornbread," she said. "It's not impressive." "I'm not looking for impressive," he said. "No," she agreed. "I've noticed that about you." She made supper. He sat at her table and watched her work, which was to say, he watched a person who moved through her own space with the unself-conscious efficiency of someone fully at home in the life they had built. And he thought about what it had taken to build that life. The husband gone in the first winter. The years alone, the trap lines and the tanning, and the long walks into Red Hollow, with a load that would have broken many men, and he felt something that he did not have a business-appropriate word for, and did not try to find one. They ate. They talked about the valley, about the Chicago firm, and what the eminent domain timeline would likely look like about Beaumont, and what a Cheyenne attorney's consultation would actually involve. They talked about his early years in the store, about the Boston counting house, about a winter he'd spent his second year in Red Hollow, when the supply wagon didn't come for 6 weeks, and he'd had to ration everything down to essentials. She laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded the first time he'd heard it, and then looked slightly surprised at herself for having laughed, and he looked down at his plate, so she didn't have to manage his reaction to it. It was dark when he finished eating. He should leave. He had said nothing about staying and had no intention of presuming the offer extended past the meal. He stood up and carried his plate to the basin, the way he would have in his own kitchen, because it was the only natural thing to do. And when he turned around, she was standing 3 feet away, very still, with an expression that he recognized, not from their professional interactions, but from something more fundamental. The look of a person making a decision they've already made and are now just enacting. "There's something I want to say," she said. "All right," he said. "I have spent 4 years making sure I did not need anyone," she said. "Making sure that no thing and no person had the capacity to undo me if they left." She held his gaze without flinching. "And I'm standing here telling you that you have made that considerably more difficult. And I want you to know that I am not angry about it, and I am not frightened about it, but I'm very aware of it. And I think you should know." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm aware of it too," he said. "On my side, in case that matters." "It matters," she said. Immediately. Definitely. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, there was no drama in it. It was the gesture of a man who has been watching a person with great attention for a long time, and has finally simply run out of reason not to say the thing that has been true for months. She let him hold it. She looked at their hands and then at him. "You rode all the way out here," she said. "I did. Because of a legal document." "Partly," he said. Something moved across her face, that almost smile that he had catalogued in every variation over months of watching. "Partly," she repeated. "Mostly," he said, "because you were out here and I was in town, and that stopped being a situation I was comfortable with some time ago." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, that decisive, unambiguous Nora Whitaker nod that meant a decision had been made and she was done deliberating. "You should ride back in the morning," she said, "when there's light." "All right," he said. She showed him the extra blankets. She said goodnight with the same directness she said everything, and went behind the curtain that divided the sleeping area from the main room, and the cabin went quiet. William sat by the cooling stove for a long time, not quite sleeping, listening to the valley make its nighttime sounds, thinking about Beaumont's 4th paragraph, and Kessler's filing, and the certified copy coming from Laramie, and all the immediate practical problems that were lined up and waiting for him. He thought about all of it, and then more than any of it, he thought about her laugh at the supper table. Unguarded and real, and briefly surprised at itself. The way it had sounded in the small cabin. The way it had filled the room completely without trying. He fell asleep in the chair sometime after midnight. In the morning, she had coffee made before he woke up. She handed him a cup without comment on the fact that he'd slept in the chair rather than on the floor with the blankets, which was where he'd intended to move, and simply hadn't. He took the cup, and they stood in the early morning quiet of the cabin with the sounds of the valley beginning outside, and drank their coffee in a silence that had the specific texture of two people who have said important things and don't need to repeat them. He left at first light. At the door he stopped. "Beaumont's letter," he said. "About removing your most effective local advocate, that's what he called it. I want you to understand what that means. He turned and looked at her. It means Kessler is not going to stop. Clearing this filing is not the end of it. He and whoever he's working with in this land arrangement, they're going to keep looking for leverage, which means you need to know that I am not going to be movable on this, no matter what they file or what it costs. He held her gaze. I want you to know that clearly. She looked at him with those precise, careful eyes. I know it, she said. I knew it before you rode out here. She paused. That's why I said thank you on Thursday. He nodded. He rode back to Red Hollow in the early morning with the valley behind him and the town ahead, and he thought about what was coming. The legal process, the certified documents, the conversation with Atkins, the longer, harder problem of Kessler, and whatever arrangement he'd made with Croft and the people behind Croft. He thought about all of it with the methodical clarity he brought to every complex problem, and underneath all of it, constant and warm, and too settled in him now, to be called a new feeling. The sound of her laugh in the small cabin. The weight of her hand. The way she had said it matters without hesitation, without qualification, without anything between the truth and the air. When he got back to the store, Pete was already there. Pete looked at him, looked at the road behind him, looked at the general condition of a man who had slept in a chair and ridden at dawn and said nothing at all. He just handed William a fresh cup of coffee and went back to the inventory. And on the counter waiting was the certified copy from the Laramie Land Office. Arrived by morning post. Survey filing public record, every number matching everything William had told Nora. Everything Croft had hoped she would never find out. William picked it up. He held it. Outside down the street, Kessler's office door was closed. It would not stay closed for long. William put the document in the separate ledger. He picked up his pen. He opened to the page with Nora's entries, the numbers, the dates, the telegram, the 3 additional words he'd written that were slightly less measured than his usual hand. He turned to the next clean line and wrote the date. Then he wrote road to the valley. She's holding. We both are. He closed the ledger. He opened his accounts book. He went to work. The certified copy from Laramie sat on Sheriff Atkins's desk for exactly 48 hours before Atkins called Kessler in and closed the door. William was not in the room. He did not need to be. He had delivered the document himself, set it on Atkins's desk with the telegraph receipt beside it, and said 4 sentences. The filing number, the date of the survey registration, the name of the Chicago firm, and the name of the Laramie clerk who had signed the certification. Then he had left and gone back to his store and waited. Pete told him what happened next because Pete had a cousin who cleaned the sheriff's office 3 mornings a week and who had very good hearing and very few opinions about what to do with the things she heard, which meant they flowed naturally to Pete, who had excellent opinions about exactly what to do with them. Atkins had told Kessler plainly, and without decorative language, that the Croft statement was going to be formally withdrawn from the record. That filing a retaliatory document against a merchant using fraudulent allegations was not something his office would be associated with, and that whatever personal arrangements Kessler had made with outside parties regarding land acquisition in his jurisdiction were going to stop immediately and completely, or the conversation they were currently having would become a considerably more official one. Kessler had not said much. He had listened. He had left. The withdrawal notice came through the following Monday. William read it, filed it in the separate ledger behind the certified copy, and did not say anything to anyone about it. There was nothing to say. The document had done what documents do when they are accurate. It had made the false thing visible, and the false thing had retreated. What he was more interested in what occupied his thinking for the next several days, in a way that the legal situation had not, was the question of what Kessler would do next. Because Beaumont had been right. Clearing the filing was not the end of it. Men like Kessler, not evil, not unintelligent, but convinced of their own rightness in a way that made them dangerous, did not simply accept that the situation had resolved against them and move on. They regrouped. They looked for the angle that was still available. William watched for it. He did not have to watch long. 2 weeks after the withdrawal notice, a woman named Mrs. Corta Beale, the wife of the dry goods owner, a woman of considerable social force in Red Hollow, who organized church fundraisers and decided which families were invited to whose dinner table, came into the Mercantile and bought 3 yards of calico she did not need. William knew she didn't need it because she had bought 4 yards of the same calico 6 weeks ago, and she was a woman of very regular purchasing habits. She was buying it to have a reason to stand at his counter. "I've been hearing things," she said while he measured the fabric, "about that Whitaker woman from Cottonwood Valley." "Have you?" William said. "People are saying you're rather involved with her business affairs." She kept her voice pleasant. "I just want you to know, William, that people talk. And a man in your position, a business owner, a respected member of this community, well, people notice who he associates with." William cut the fabric on the line. He folded it neatly, the way he folded everything. "Mrs. Beale," he said, "Mrs. Whitaker is my most productive supplier. Her quality of work is the best I've seen in 11 years in this trade. Any association I have with her business affairs is the same association I have with every person whose goods I buy and sell." "Of course," Mrs. Beale said. "Of course. I just thought you should hear as a friend that some people find the frequency of her visits unusual." "She comes when she has product to sell," William said. He set the folded fabric on the counter. "That'll be 40 cents. She paid. She left. She had delivered the message she came to deliver, which was not really about calico or unusual visit frequency, but about the specific, quiet, very effective kind of social pressure that frontier towns used to manage people who didn't conform to their expected shapes. William wrote the 40 cents in his ledger and thought about what had just happened. Kessler had been in the store the day before, briefly buying nothing and saying little. The timing was not a coincidence. Kessler understood that a legal approach had failed and had moved to social leverage, which was the natural next instrument, set the community's unease to work, let it do quietly what the filed document had failed to do loudly. That evening, after the store closed, William wrote a letter. Not to Beaumont, not to Aldrich, not to the Laramie Land Office. He wrote to Nora. He had not written to her before. They had communicated through her visits through the store, through Pete occasionally carrying a practical message. He had not written because writing was a different thing. It was the kind of contact that said something beyond the transaction. And he had waited until he had something to say that deserved to be written down. He had that now. He wrote to her plainly. He told her about Mrs. Beale's visit and what it meant. He told her that the social pressure Kessler was now applying was real and would likely increase, and that it would focus not on her legal standing, which was solid, but on her reputation, and by extension, the reputations of anyone clearly aligned with her. He told her she should know this because she deserved to make her decisions with full information, as she always had. And then, because he had decided he was going to be a man who said the true thing instead of the safe thing, he wrote one more paragraph. "I want to say clearly what I have not said directly. I am aligned with you. Not as your merchant, not as your local contact, but as a man who has watched you operate with more integrity and intelligence than anyone I have encountered in this territory, and who has understood for some time that what I feel toward you is not professional admiration, though it is that too. Whatever Kessler arranges next, I will still be here. I thought you should have that in writing." He read it over twice. He did not change anything. He sealed it and paid the mail rider extra to make sure it reached Cottonwood Valley within 2 days. Then he went back to work and did not think about it, or tried not to. The trying was imperfect. Her reply came in 4 days, which was faster than he'd expected given the trail. It was shorter than his letter. Nora Whitaker was not a woman who used more words than a thing required. "I received your letter. I've read it 4 times, which I mention only so you understand it was not read carelessly. What you wrote in the last paragraph, I knew it before you wrote it, or I suspected it with enough certainty that it had been affecting my thinking for some months. It's affecting it now. I'll be in Red Hollow next Tuesday. N.W." William read it in the back of the store, standing at the shelf where the Mercantile Gazette lived. He read it twice. Then he went out to the counter and picked up his ledger and wrote the date and 2 words 4 times. He put the ledger away and went back to work. Tuesday came the way Tuesdays do, at the exact same pace as every other day, which felt on this particular Tuesday like a fundamental injustice of the physical world. She walked through the door at 10:30 with a load that was smaller than her usual one bundle. Moderate weight, the kind she carried when she wanted to make good time and wasn't planning to resupply heavily. She set it on the counter and looked at him. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. They looked at each other for a moment across the counter with the full awareness of two people who have said important things in writing and are now standing in the same room for the first time since those things were said. Pete materialized from the back with the specific reflexes of a man who had decided he needed to take an extended inventory of the supply shed and would be unavailable for the foreseeable future. The back door closed behind him. "How was the trail?" William asked. "Muddy," she said. "There was rain the day before yesterday." She pulled off her coat and set it over the chair. "I got your letter." "I know. I got yours." She looked at him steadily. "4 times," she confirmed without any indication of embarrassment about confirming it. Just a fact set on the table the same way she set everything down with full intention and no apology. "I've read yours more than that," he said. Something shifted in her expression, that movement toward the almost smile, but closer to arrival this time. Closer than he had ever seen it get. "I need to tell you something," she said, "before we go further with this, and I need you to hear it completely before you respond." "All right," he said. "I am not a woman who does things halfway," she said. "I don't know how to. I didn't know how to run a trapline halfway or tin hides halfway, or survive in that valley halfway. When I commit to something, I commit to all of it." She held his gaze without flinching. "So if this what you wrote, what I think you meant by it, if this is something you're still uncertain about, I need you to tell me that now, because I am not uncertain. And I won't do this if we're not in the same place." He looked at her for a moment. At the woman who had walked into his store without hesitating at the threshold, who had questioned a price that was in her favor, who had held a threatening note with steady hands and built a legal record out of pure practical intelligence, who had laughed at his supper table and handed him coffee in the early morning without a word about the chair. "I'm not uncertain," he said. "Then say it plainly," she said. "I don't need poetry. I need the plain version." "I love you," he said. "That's the plain version." The store was very quiet. She breathed in once. She looked at the counter for just a moment, not away from him, not a retreat, just the brief downward glance of a person absorbing something real. Then she looked back up. "All right," she said. Her voice was not dramatic. It was warm and direct and completely like her. "Then we need to talk about what this actually looks like, because I meant what I told you that first time. I keep my land." "I would never ask you for your land," he said. "I know you wouldn't ask," she said. "I'm telling you, it's not available to be asked for. My land, my traplines, my business, those stay mine. They're not part of this." "They're part of you," he said. "Which means they're not separate from this. But they're yours. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. Then, "No," she said slowly. "They're not, are they?" "No," he said. "You understand the difference. I've been watching you operate for months," he said. "A man who couldn't understand that difference would have disappeared from your consideration long before now." The almost smile arrived, fully, completely, with nothing held back. It changed her face in a way that made something in his chest tighten sharply and then release the way a knot comes undone all at once. "Yes," she said. "He would have." They were still standing on opposite sides of the counter. He came around it. He stopped in front of her close enough that the distance was deliberate, now chosen, and he put his hand against her face, the way he had held her hand in the cabin, without theater, without drama, just the straightforward physical expression of something too large to keep entirely in words. She put her hand over his. They stood like that for a moment. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Kessler, the Chicago firm, the town." "I know," he said. Mrs. Beale is going to have significant opinions. She already does, he said. I charged her 40 cents for fabric she didn't need. Nora laughed. That laugh full and unguarded, the one he had heard once at the supper table and had been thinking about for weeks. Up close it was even better. Good, she said. The door to the supply shed opened. Pete emerged, looked at the general situation with the expression of a man who has made a thorough inventory of everything in the shed and has returned at a natural and entirely coincidental moment and said, "I'll put the coffee on," and went directly to the back stove without making eye contact with either of them. Nora looked at William. "He knew," she said quietly. "Pete knows everything," William said. "He just has the good sense to know when to inventory the supply shed." She shook her head, and there was warmth in it, and ease, and the specific quality of comfort that does not come quickly to careful people. It has to be earned through time and honesty, and the accumulation of moments that proved themselves trustworthy. She had not expected to find this. He had not expected to find her. And neither of them, being who they were, was going to make that into something. It wasn't some story of fate or destiny or romantic inevitability. They were practical people. They had found something real in a practical way, through work and contracts and coffee and a threatening note and a ride through muddy valley trails and a letter that was read 4 times. That was enough. That was in fact everything. The complications did not wait long to announce themselves. The following week, Kessler came into the store when both William and Nora were present, Nora completing her resupply transaction, William at the counter. Kessler stopped just inside the door and took in the scene with the expression of a man who has been managing his reactions for too long and is getting tired. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "Deputy," she said. She did not stop what she was doing. Kessler came to the counter. He looked at William. "I want you to know," he said with the particular tone of a man delivering a warning he's framed as information, "that the Chicago firm has retained a local attorney. Out of Cheyenne. They're going to push the eminent domain process." "Good," Nora said before William could respond. She turned from the shelves she'd been reviewing. "That means it goes to court, which means the valuation is set by a judge, which means I get fair market rate for a railroad corridor easement rather than whatever Croft was authorized to offer." She looked at Kessler steadily. "Was there something else?" Kessler's jaw tightened. "You think you've won something," he said. "I think my land is my land," she said. "I think a survey filing is a public record, and a notarized document is a legal one, and a certified copy from the county land office speaks for itself." She tilted her head slightly. "What exactly did you think you were going to accomplish, Henry?" It was the first time William had heard her use his first name. The effect was not warmth. It was the opposite of warmth. It was the specific intimacy of someone who knows you well enough to name you directly, and does so to make sure you understand exactly how clearly you have been seen. Kessler stood very still. "You've made yourself a difficult woman," he said. "No," she said. "I've made myself an informed one. The difficulty is yours." He left. The store exhaled. Pete from the back made no sound at all, which was its own form of comment. William looked at Nora. "That was," he started. "Necessary," she said. She went back to the shelf. "He needed to hear it from me directly. Not through you, not through legal documents. From me." She pulled a spool of rope down and assessed it. Men like Kessler don't finish until they understand that the person they're trying to move has already measured the ground they're standing on and decided not to move. And now he understands that... She set the rope on the counter. "He will," she said. "Give him a week." She was right. She was right about Kessler's timeline and about the Chicago firm's eminent domain process and about the court-set valuation, which came in 4 months later at a figure that made Croft's original option offer look like an insult, which it had been. The easement covered a narrow corridor along the eastern edge of her property. The cabin was untouched. The trap lines were untouched. She received the settlement payment on a Tuesday, which remained her preferred day in Red Hollow. She deposited half of it with the Cheyenne Bank, through William's existing commercial account. The practical choice, the efficient choice. The kind of financial arrangement that two people make when they have decided that their lives are genuinely intertwined without requiring either of them to give up the shape of themselves. She put the other half toward expanding the tanning operation. A second stretching rack, a proper tanning pit, the materials for a curing shed she had designed herself on paper over the winter. Beaumont, reviewing the arrangement from Cheyenne, wrote back with what was for him an extraordinary level of personal warmth. This is an unusually sensible financial structure for people in your situation. I see arrangements far more complicated than this fail routinely. Whatever judgment brought you to this structure, I'd suggest keeping it. William read the letter to Nora across the breakfast table on a Wednesday morning in February. She listened with her coffee in both hands. "He says our judgment is unusual," she said. "He says it's sensible," William said. "For a Cheyenne attorney, that's enthusiasm." She looked at him over her cup, with that expression, the fully arrived smile, which was still not a common thing, and therefore still worth everything every time. "Read me the last part again." He read it. She nodded. "Good man," she said. "Send him a decent Christmas gift this year." They married in April, on a morning that was cold enough to require coats and a ceremony that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not a moment longer witnessed by Pete Granger and Doc Harker and 3 people from Cottonwood Valley who had been Nora's nearest neighbors for 4 years, and who had in that time apparently developed opinions about William that they chose to share with him directly and at some length at the reception afterward. He received these opinions with good humor. He had been preparing for them for months. Mrs. Beale did not attend. She sent a card that was technically congratulatory, which William appreciated as a sincere effort from a woman doing her best to accept that the world had not arranged itself according to her expectations. Kessler left Red Hollow 6 weeks before the wedding transferred at his own request to a posting in eastern Wyoming. William heard about it from Atkins, who delivered the news with the particular relief of a man whose office had been complicated for 2 years and had just become simpler. "I think," Atkins said, "that some people leave when they figure out the ground isn't going to shift under the other person's feet." "I think you're right," William said. Atkins shook his hand and went back to his office. The years that came after were not simple. Nothing worth having is simple. There were hard winters and difficult buyers, and one season where the trap lines produced half of what they usually did, and they had to recalculate every projection for the quarter. There was a dispute with the railroad's local contractor over the easement boundary markers that required Beaumont to write 3 increasingly firm letters before it was resolved. There was the winter Pete's health declined, and William ran the store largely alone for 2 months, and Nora came in 4 days a week instead of her regular Tuesday and took over the accounts without being asked. Sitting at William's desk with the ledger open and a cup of coffee at her elbow, applying the same precise intelligence to his books that she applied to everything she touched. He came in from the supply shed one afternoon during that stretch and found her at the desk pencil, moving completely absorbed, and he stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her work. She looked up without starting. She always heard him. "The February receivables are wrong," she said. "You're missing an entry from the Haverford account, $14. "I know," he said. "I was going to correct it this week." "I already corrected it." She went back to the page. He stood there for another moment. "Nora," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him with the full steadiness of a woman who has been looked at carefully by this man for years and has grown entirely comfortable with being seen. "That's what this is," she said simply. "We do the work. Together." He nodded. He came in from the doorway and sat at the second chair she had brought up alongside his desk, and he picked up the correspondence stack, and they worked side by side through the afternoon without needing to say anything else. Pete recovered in the spring. He came back to the store with a slightly slower step and a completely undiminished instinct for knowing when to inventory the supply shed, which William had missed more than he'd expected to. The curing shed in Cottonwood Valley was finished the following summer. Nora had designed it for volume 3 times her previous capacity, and the first full season's output from the expanded operation produced a shipment that made Aldrich in Denver send a telegram that consisted almost entirely of numbers, which was the most expressive communication William had ever received from him. She read the telegram at the breakfast table and did the math in her head faster than William could find his pencil. "That's enough," she said quietly, not triumphant. Something more settled than triumph. "For what?" he asked. She looked at him. "For whatever comes next," she said. "For the next hard winter. For Pete's doctor bills if it happens again. For a proper schoolroom if this town ever decides it wants one." She set the telegram down. "For being the kind of person who can say yes to something good without checking first whether she can afford to lose it." He looked at her across the table. "You've been thinking about that for a long time," he said. "Since the day I almost signed Croft's option," she said. "I thought if I ever get to a place where I can afford to choose freely, not from desperation, not because someone cornered me into it, I want to remember what that feels like, and I want to use it well." He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. "You're already using it well," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, with all the steadiness and precision and quiet fire that had walked through his door on an ordinary Tuesday morning years ago and had never once asked his permission for any of it. "We are," she said, "both of us." Outside, Red Hollow was going about its morning with its usual practical indifference to the private weight of things. Wagons on the road. Someone hammering near the livery. The smell of the bakery 2 streets over that had opened the previous spring and that Pete had strong opinions about. Inside, at a table in a house above a Mercantile store, 2 people who had both spent years believing that self-sufficiency and love were incompatible, that needing no one and building something real could not exist in the same life, sat with their hands together and understood, with the full certainty of people who had tested the proposition against hard experience, that they had been wrong about that. They had not needed each other to survive. They had both already proven they could survive alone. They had chosen each other anyway. Deliberately, carefully, with full information and clear eyes and the kind of commitment that does not require rescue to justify itself. That was not a small thing. In a world that worked very hard to convince capable people that their capability made them unlovable and that love required the surrender of the self that was, in fact, everything. Nora Whitaker had walked into Red Hollow with pelts worth more than anyone expected, and had refused at every turn to be worth less than she was. And in doing so, she had found the one thing she had not gone looking for: a man who already knew her value before she told him, and who had the good sense to stay out of her way while she proved it to everyone else. That was the whole of it. That was the truth of it, and it was enough to last a lifetime, because they had both lived enough of the other kind to know without any doubt at all the difference.